In the desert heat of Fort Rucker, Alabama, where the roar of Apache helicopters cuts through the humid air like thunder, Captain Sarah Martinez gripped the cyclic stick with hands that had been trained to kill but were forbidden to fight. She could navigate a $35 million AH-64 Apache through sandstorms, thread it between power lines in zero visibility, and put a Hellfire missile through a window from 3 miles away. But there was one thing her superiors said she couldn't do: take that deadly machine into actual combat. For years, she watched her male counterparts deploy to Iraq and Afghanistan while she remained stateside, relegated to training missions and transport duties.
They told her it was policy?
They told her it was for her own protection. They told her combat was no place for a woman. What they didn't know was that Sarah Martinez had been preparing for this fight her entire life, and she wasn't about to let outdated regulations ground her dreams of defending her country where it mattered most. This is the story of how one determined pilot shattered the ultimate glass ceiling, not with protests or petitions, but by proving that courage, skill, and determination know no gender. And how her fight to fly combat missions would change military aviation forever. Sarah Martinez first saw an Apache helicopter when she was 8 years old at an air show in San Antonio, Texas. The massive machine descended from the sky like a mechanical bird of prey, its twin engines screaming and rotor blades cutting the air with precision that made her heart race. While other children ran to the cotton candy stands or waited in line for face painting, Sarah stood mesmerized by the display of raw power and technological marvel before her. "That's what I'm going to fly someday," she announced to her father, tugging on his sleeve with the kind of certainty that only children possess. Her father, a mechanic at a local auto shop, smiled and ruffled her dark hair. He had no idea that his daughter's declaration would set her on a collision course with military tradition and gender barriers that had stood for decades. Growing up in a working-class family in South San Antonio, Sarah learned early that nothing came easy. Her mother worked double shifts as a nurse at the local hospital, while her father put in long hours keeping cars running for customers who often couldn't afford the repairs they needed. The Martinez household operated on a simple principle that her parents had learned from their own immigrant parents: work hard, stay focused, and never accept that something is impossible just because others say it is. Sarah's fascination with aviation only grew stronger as she got older. She spent countless hours at the library reading about military aircraft, studying the technical manuals and combat histories that most kids her age ignored. She learned about the Apache's capabilities, its advanced targeting systems, and the incredible skill required to pilot such a complex machine. The more she read, the more determined she became to master every aspect of military aviation. In high school, Sarah excelled in mathematics and physics, subjects that came naturally to her analytical mind. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed her exceptional performance and asked about her career plans during a routine meeting in her senior year. When Sarah explained her goal of becoming a military pilot, Mrs. Rodriguez's expression shifted from encouragement to concern. "Have you considered other career paths in aviation?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked carefully. "Perhaps air traffic control or aircraft maintenance? Those are excellent fields for young women with your abilities." Sarah felt a familiar frustration rise in her chest. It wasn't the first time someone had tried to steer her away from her dreams, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. "I want to fly combat missions," she said firmly. "I want to pilot Apache helicopters." Mrs. Rodriguez shuffled the papers on her desk uncomfortably. "Sarah, you're an excellent student, but you need to be realistic about the opportunities available to you. The military has certain restrictions on women in combat roles. Maybe you should consider civilian aviation or—" "Those restrictions will change," Sarah interrupted, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "And when they do, I'll be ready."
After graduation, Sarah enrolled at the University of Texas at San Antonio, where she studied aerospace engineering while participating in the ROTC program.
Her professors quickly recognized her exceptional spatial reasoning abilities and her intuitive understanding of flight dynamics. Captain James Wright, the ROTC instructor responsible for evaluating candidates for military aviation programs, had seen hundreds of young people dream of becoming pilots. Most lacked either the intellectual capacity or the mental toughness required for such demanding training. Sarah Martinez was different. During flight simulations, she demonstrated an almost supernatural ability to process multiple data streams simultaneously while maintaining precise control of her aircraft. Her reaction times were faster than most male candidates, and her decision-making under pressure was consistently sound. Captain Wright found himself in the unusual position of evaluating a candidate who exceeded every standard he used to measure pilot potential but who faced institutional barriers that had nothing to do with ability. "Miss Martinez," Captain Wright said after a particularly impressive simulation exercise, "your scores are in the top 2% of all candidates I've evaluated. Your spatial awareness and hand-eye coordination are exceptional. Have you given any thought to pursuing transport or reconnaissance aviation?" Sarah had heard variations of this conversation dozens of times, but coming from Captain Wright, it stung more than usual. She respected his opinion and had hoped he would see past the restrictions that limited her opportunities. "Sir, with respect, I've given considerable thought to combat aviation. Specifically, I want to fly attack helicopters." Captain Wright studied her for a long moment. He had flown Apaches himself during 2 tours in the Persian Gulf, and he understood both the incredible demands of combat aviation and the arbitrary nature of the restrictions that kept qualified candidates grounded. "The regulations currently prohibit women from direct combat roles," he said finally. "That includes attack helicopter missions." "Currently," Sarah repeated, emphasizing the word. "But regulations change, sir. Technology changes. The nature of warfare changes. When those restrictions are lifted, I intend to be the most qualified candidate available." Something in her tone caught Captain Wright's attention. He had heard determination before, but this was different. This was the quiet confidence of someone who had already decided to achieve something regardless of the obstacles in her path. "What makes you so certain those restrictions will change?" he asked. Sarah considered the question carefully. She had spent years thinking about this very issue, studying military history and the gradual integration of women into previously restricted roles, because excluding qualified people from serving in any capacity weakens our military effectiveness, sir. And because the nature of modern warfare makes traditional distinctions between combat and non-combat roles increasingly meaningless. A transport pilot flying through a combat zone faces the same dangers as an attack pilot. The only difference is that the attack pilot has better weapons to defend herself with. Captain Wright found himself nodding despite his initial skepticism. Sarah's analysis was logical and well-reasoned, qualities that would serve her well in any military aviation role. Assuming those restrictions were eventually lifted, he said, "What would you do to prepare yourself for combat aviation?" "I would master every skill that current Apache pilots possess," Sarah replied immediately. "I would study every technical manual, complete every training program, and exceed every performance standard. When the opportunity comes, I want there to be no doubt about my qualifications." That conversation marked a turning point in Sarah's military preparation. Captain Wright began providing her with advanced training materials typically reserved for students already accepted into combat aviation programs. She studied Apache technical manuals, flight characteristics, weapon systems, and tactical employment procedures. She memorized emergency procedures in combat formations. She learned about the psychological demands of combat flying and the split-second decision-making required in hostile environments. During her junior year at university, Sarah's academic performance caught the attention of Major Lisa Thompson, a transport pilot who had been assigned to the ROTC program after completing her own flight training. Major Thompson had faced many of the same institutional barriers that Sarah was encountering, though she had ultimately chosen to accept a role in transport aviation rather than continue fighting for combat opportunities. "I've been watching your progress," Major Thompson said during a mentoring session. "Your technical knowledge is impressive, and your flight aptitude scores are outstanding. Have you considered the advantages of transport aviation? You'd be flying immediately after completing flight school, and you'd be serving in critical support roles." Sarah appreciated Major Thompson's guidance, but she sensed an underlying message of compromise that troubled her. "Ma'am, I understand the importance of transport aviation, but my goal has always been combat flying. I believe that's where I can make the greatest contribution to our military effectiveness." Major Thompson sighed, recognizing her younger self in Sarah's determined expression. "I admire your persistence, but sometimes we have to adapt our goals to match available opportunities. I've had a fulfilling career in transport aviation, and you could too." "With respect, ma'am, I don't want to adapt my goals," Sarah replied. "I want to achieve them. If that means waiting longer or working harder, then that's what I'll do." After that conversation, Major Thompson began following Sarah's progress more closely. She saw something in the young woman that reminded her of her own abandoned dreams, and she gradually shifted from discouraging Sarah's ambitions to actively supporting them. She provided additional training opportunities, introduced Sarah to other female pilots who had successfully navigated military aviation careers, and began advocating within the ROTC program for expanded opportunities for qualified female candidates. By her senior year, Sarah had established herself as the top aviation candidate in her ROTC class. Her academic performance remained outstanding. Her leadership evaluations were exceptional, and her flight aptitude scores were higher than any candidate Captain Wright had evaluated in his 5 years with the program. Yet the restrictions on women in combat roles remained in place, limiting her options to transport and reconnaissance aviation. During a final evaluation meeting before graduation, Captain Wright presented Sarah with their aviation assignment options. Transport helicopter pilot training was available immediately, with guaranteed flight school slots at Fort Rucker. Reconnaissance aviation offered slightly more challenging flying but still within approved roles for female pilots. Attack helicopter training remained unavailable due to existing regulations. "These are excellent opportunities," Captain Wright said, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "Transport pilots play crucial roles in military operations, and reconnaissance aviation offers challenging flying in sophisticated aircraft." Sarah studied the paperwork spread across Captain Wright's desk. Everything she had worked for during 4 years of university and ROTC training had led to this moment, yet the opportunity she most wanted remained out of reach. She felt a familiar frustration rising in her chest, but underneath it was something else, a stubborn determination that had carried her through countless obstacles already. "Sir, I appreciate these opportunities, but I'd like to request something different," she said finally. "I want to apply for Apache pilot training, even though current regulations prevent me from flying combat missions. I want to complete the full training program and be ready when those regulations change." Captain Wright looked surprised. "Sarah, you understand that Apache training is specifically for combat missions? If you complete that training under current regulations, you'd be qualified to fly the aircraft but prohibited from using it in its primary role. You might spend years in training positions without ever deploying to combat operations." "I understand that risk, sir," Sarah replied. "But I also understand that regulations change, sometimes faster than people expect. When they do change, I want to be the most qualified candidate available, not someone who has to start training from the beginning." Captain Wright found himself in an unusual position. Sarah's request was technically possible. There was no regulation preventing women from completing Apache flight training, only from flying combat missions after graduation. The training would be grueling, expensive, and might ultimately prove futile if regulations remained unchanged. But her logic was sound, and her determination was evident. "This would be an unusual situation," he said slowly. "You'd be completing training for missions you couldn't legally fly. Your career progression would be limited, and there would be no guarantee that regulations would change during your military service." "I understand those limitations, sir," Sarah said, "but I also believe that change is coming, whether it takes 2 years or 10 years. I'd rather spend that time as a qualified Apache pilot waiting for the opportunity to serve in combat than as a transport pilot wishing I had prepared differently." Captain Wright spent the next hour explaining the risks and uncertainties Sarah would face if she pursued Apache training under current restrictions. The training itself would be as demanding as any military aviation program, requiring mastery of complex flight systems, weapons employment, and tactical procedures. She would be competing against male candidates who had clear career paths ahead of them, while her own future remained uncertain. Despite these warnings, Sarah's resolve never wavered. She had spent 4 years preparing for this opportunity, and she wasn't willing to settle for alternatives that felt like compromises. She wanted to fly the most sophisticated attack helicopter in the world, and she was willing to accept uncertainty about when that opportunity might come. "I'll submit your application for Apache flight training," Captain Wright said finally. "But I want you to understand that this decision will define your entire military career. You're choosing a difficult path with no guaranteed outcome." Sarah smiled for the first time during their meeting. "Sir, I've been choosing difficult paths my entire life. This one just happens to have rotors and missiles attached." 3 weeks later, Sarah received her acceptance letter to Apache Flight School at Fort Rucker, Alabama. She would be the first woman in her class, possibly the first woman ever to complete Apache training without the prospect of flying combat missions afterward. The letter came with additional paperwork explaining the unusual nature of her situation and requiring multiple acknowledgements that she understood the limitations on her future assignments. As Sarah read through the documents that would shape the next phase of her life, she thought about the 8-year-old girl who had stood mesmerized by an Apache helicopter at an air show in San Antonio. That little girl had declared her intention to fly such a machine someday, and now, 18 years later, she was finally getting her chance to try. The restrictions that kept her from combat missions were real, but so was her determination to overcome them. She had spent years preparing for this opportunity, and she intended to make the most of it, regardless of how long it might take for regulations to catch up with her qualifications. The Apache helicopter had captured her imagination as a child, and now it was time to see if she had what it took to master the machine that had inspired her dreams of military aviation. The Alabama heat hit Sarah like a wall when she stepped off the bus at Fort Rucker on the first day of Apache flight training. The humidity made her uniform stick to her skin within minutes, and the constant background noise of helicopters taking off and landing created a symphony of mechanical precision that would become the soundtrack to the next 18 months of her life. Fort Rucker was known throughout the military as the home of Army aviation, where the most elite helicopter pilots in the world learned their craft. The Apache training program was considered the pinnacle of military aviation education, combining the technical complexity of flying a $35 million machine with the tactical demands of employing weapons systems that could destroy enemy forces from miles away. Sarah's class consisted of 12 pilots, all male except for her. They had been selected from hundreds of qualified candidates based on their performance in preliminary flight training, their academic records, and their psychological evaluations. Each had already completed basic helicopter training and had been flying military aircraft for at least 2 years. Sarah was the only student who had gone directly from ROTC to Apache training, a path that was virtually unheard of in military aviation. The first person she met was Chief Warrant Officer Mike Rodriguez, the senior instructor pilot who would oversee her training. Rodriguez had been flying Apaches for 15 years, including 3 combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He had trained hundreds of pilots and had developed a reputation for demanding perfection while maintaining the kind of patience required to turn competent helicopter pilots into Apache weapons systems operators. "Miss Martinez," Rodriguez said during their initial meeting, "I've reviewed your file, and I want to be completely honest with you about what you're facing here. Apache training is designed to prepare pilots for combat operations. Every exercise, every simulation, every flight hour is focused on making you lethal in a combat environment. You're going to learn skills that you may never be authorized to use." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Chief, I understand the situation, and I'm prepared to train for missions I may not initially be allowed to fly. But I believe those restrictions will change, and when they do, I want to be ready." He had heard similar declarations from overconfident young pilots before, but something in Sarah's tone suggested a level of preparation and commitment that went beyond typical military enthusiasm. "What makes you so certain you can handle Apache training?" he asked. "I've been studying Apache systems and procedures for 4 years, Sarah replied. "I've memorized the technical manuals, studied combat employment tactics, and completed every simulator program I could access. I know the limitations I'm facing, but I also know my own capabilities."
Rodriguez pulled out a thick binder filled with technical diagrams and system specifications.
"Tell me about the Apache's target acquisition and designation system," he said, opening to a complex schematic. Sarah leaned forward and began explaining the TAD system in detail, describing its electro-optical sensors, laser designator capabilities, and integration with the aircraft's weapons systems. She discussed the system's operating parameters, its limitations in different weather conditions, and the pilot coordination required for effective target engagement. Rodriguez listened with growing interest as she demonstrated knowledge that typically took students months to acquire. "Impressive," Rodriguez said when she finished. "Now tell me about the challenges you think you'll face as the only woman in your class." Sarah had been expecting this question, but Rodriguez's direct approach caught her off guard. Most of her previous instructors had either avoided the topic entirely or addressed it with uncomfortable platitudes about equal opportunity. "Chief, I expect some of my classmates will question whether I belong here. Some instructors might have doubts about my physical capabilities or my mental toughness. I plan to address those concerns by exceeding every performance standard and proving my qualifications through results rather than arguments." "That's a reasonable approach," Rodriguez said. "But Apache training isn't just about individual performance. You'll be working in teams, relying on your classmates for support, and eventually flying with co-pilots who need to trust your abilities completely. How do you plan to build that trust?" Building trust with skeptical colleagues was something she had been thinking about throughout her military preparation. But Rodriguez's question forced her to confront the reality that her success would depend on more than just her own performance. "I plan to be the best wingman, the most reliable team member, and the most prepared student in my class," she said. "I want my classmates to see me as someone who makes them better, not as a distraction or a political statement." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the right attitude. Apache pilots depend on each other for survival in combat, and trust is built through consistent performance under pressure." Your gender won't matter if you can prove that having you on their wing makes them more effective. The first weeks of Apache training were designed to overwhelm students with information. Sarah found herself studying technical manuals that described systems more complex than anything she had encountered in preliminary flight training. The Apache helicopter contained over 1 million components, multiple redundant systems, and weapons capabilities that required precise coordination between pilot and co-pilot. Her classmates' initial reaction to her presence ranged from curiosity to skepticism. Lieutenant Tom Stevens, a transport pilot transitioning to attack helicopters, made no effort to hide his doubts about women in combat aviation. "No offense, Martinez," he said during their first break, "but I don't understand why you're here if you can't actually fly combat missions. Seems like you're taking a slot that could go to someone who can actually use the training." Sarah had prepared herself for such comments, but hearing them still stung. "I'm here because I'm qualified for the training, and because I believe the restrictions will change," she replied calmly. "When they do, I want to be ready to serve wherever I'm needed." Stevens shook his head. "That's a pretty big gamble with your career. What if the restrictions don't change? You'll have spent 2 years learning to do a job you can't actually do." Before Sarah could respond, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, a pilot who had already completed 1 deployment flying reconnaissance helicopters, stepped into the conversation. "Stevens Martinez scored higher on the entrance exams than any of us. If she's willing to take the risk, maybe we should focus on our own performance instead of questioning hers." Sarah appreciated Morrison's support, but she wanted to address Stevens' concerns directly. "Tom, you're right that I'm taking a risk," she said. "But military aviation has always been about calculated risks. I've calculated that the benefits of being prepared for changing regulations outweigh the costs of training for missions I might not initially fly." As the weeks progressed, Sarah's classmates began to recognize that her knowledge of Apache systems exceeded their own. While they struggled to memorize technical specifications, she was already integrating complex information and asking advanced questions about tactical employment. Her study habits became legendary among the students, who often found her in the library at midnight reviewing procedures that wouldn't be covered in class for weeks. Lieutenant Morrison began studying with Sarah, initially to benefit from her knowledge, but gradually developing respect for her analytical approach to complex problems. "How do you process all this information so quickly?" he asked one evening as they worked through weapons system integration procedures. "I've been preparing for this training for 4 years, Sarah explained. "While you guys were flying transport missions and building flight hours, I was studying Apache manuals and combat tactics. I knew I'd have to be better prepared than everyone else just to prove I belonged here." Morrison looked up from his notes. "That's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on yourself. Don't you ever worry about burning out?" The pressure was intense, but it felt different from the academic stress she had experienced in college. This was pressure with a purpose, each challenge bringing her closer to mastering the aircraft that had fascinated her since childhood. "I worry more about wasting this opportunity," she said. "I might be the only woman who gets a chance to complete Apache training for years to come. I want to prove that women can excel at this just as well as men can." The first time Sarah climbed into an actual Apache cockpit, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that surprised her with its intensity. She had spent countless hours in simulators, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of sitting in the pilot's seat of the most sophisticated attack helicopter ever built. The cockpit was cramped and filled with instruments, displays, and controls that seemed to cover every available surface. Chief Rodriguez sat in the co-pilot's seat, watching Sarah's reaction carefully. "Take your time getting familiar with the layout," he said. "This aircraft has more systems than anything you've flown before, and the learning curve is steep for everyone." Sarah began working through the pre-flight checklist, calling out each item and explaining the associated procedures. Rodriguez noted that her movements were confident and precise, without the hesitation that usually characterized first-time Apache students. She had clearly spent considerable time studying cockpit layouts and memorizing switch positions. "You've done this before," Rodriguez observed as Sarah completed the electrical systems check. "In simulators, Chief," Sarah replied, "but I've never felt the actual weight of the controls or heard the real engine sounds. It's different from anything I expected." Rodriguez smiled. "That's what every student says during their first cockpit familiarization. The simulators are good, but they can't replicate the physical sensations of flying a machine this powerful. Are you ready to start engines?" The next hour was a revelation for Sarah. Flying the Apache required a level of coordination between hands, feet, and eyes that exceeded anything she had experienced in preliminary training. The aircraft responded to control inputs with precision that was both thrilling and demanding, requiring constant attention to maintain stable flight. Rodriguez guided her through basic maneuvers, gradually increasing the complexity as her comfort level improved. Your control touch is very smooth, Rodriguez commented as Sarah completed a series of hovering exercises. Many students are too aggressive with the controls at first, but you're finding the right balance between authority and finesse. Sarah felt a surge of confidence that she tried to keep from showing in her voice. The aircraft feels different from what I expected, Chief. More responsive but also more demanding. It's like flying a sports car after learning in a pickup truck. That's an excellent analogy, Rodriguez said. The Apache will do exactly what you tell it to do, but it requires precise inputs and constant attention. There's no margin for error when you're flying low-level missions in hostile territory. As her flight training progressed, Sarah's classmates began to acknowledge her superior knowledge of Apache systems and procedures. Lieutenant Stevens, who had initially questioned her presence in the program, found himself asking for her help with complex technical questions. "Martinez, you seem to understand the weapons systems better than the rest of us," he admitted during a study session. "Can you explain the laser-guided missile employment procedures again?" Sarah was happy to help, but she also recognized an opportunity to build the trust and teamwork that Chief Rodriguez had emphasized. "Sure, Tom, but let's work through it together so everyone understands the concepts. Jake, can you walk us through the target designation process while I explain the missile guidance system?" These collaborative study sessions became regular events, with Sarah often taking the lead in explaining complex procedures while encouraging her classmates to contribute their own insights and questions. Lieutenant Morrison noticed that the group's overall performance improved significantly when they studied together, with Sarah's knowledge complementing the practical experience that others brought from their previous flying assignments. "You know, Martinez," Morrison said after a particularly productive study session, "you're making all of us better pilots. I wasn't sure what to expect when I heard a woman was joining our class, but you've proven that diversity actually strengthens our unit."
Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she was more interested in the practical results of their improved teamwork.
"That's exactly what I was hoping for, Jake. Apache pilots have to work as teams in combat, so we might as well start building that trust and coordination now." The physical demands of Apache flying became apparent during Sarah's first extended training flight. The aircraft required constant control inputs to maintain precise flight paths, and the cramped cockpit position put strain on her back and shoulders that she hadn't anticipated. After 3 hours of intensive maneuvering, she emerged from the cockpit with muscles aching and sweat-soaked flight gear. Chief Rodriguez noticed her fatigue but was pleased with her performance during the flight. "The physical demands get easier as your endurance improves," he said. "But I have to ask, are you having any difficulties with the control forces? Some of our smaller pilots struggle with the physical strength required for certain maneuvers." Sarah had been anticipating this question since beginning flight training. She was smaller than most of her male classmates, and she knew that physical strength would be scrutinized more closely for her than for them. "Chief, I felt the control forces, but I was able to handle them throughout the flight. I've been working on upper body strength specifically to prepare for these demands." "Good," Rodriguez said. "Physical conditioning is important for all Apache pilots, but it's especially critical during combat missions, when you might be flying for extended periods under high stress. Keep working on your fitness, and let me know if you need any adjustments to your training program." That evening, Sarah added an extra hour of physical conditioning to her daily routine. She had always been in good shape, but Apache flying demanded a level of sustained strength and endurance that exceeded her previous experience. She worked on grip strength, shoulder stability, and core muscle development that would help her maintain precise control during long flights. Her dedication to physical preparation didn't go unnoticed by her classmates. Lieutenant Stevens, who had initially doubted her capabilities, commented on her commitment during a conversation in the gym. "I have to admit, Martinez, you're working harder than most of us to prepare for this training. I respect that kind of dedication." Sarah appreciated the acknowledgement, but she was more focused on the practical benefits of her preparation. "Thanks, Tom. I figure that if I'm going to be the first woman to complete Apache training, I want to set a good example for the women who might follow me." As her training progressed through increasingly complex phases, Sarah's performance consistently ranked among the top students in her class. Her knowledge of systems and procedures, combined with her smooth flying technique and strong work ethic, earned respect from instructors and classmates alike. But she knew that the most challenging phases of training still lay ahead, including weapons employment, tactical maneuvering, and the final evaluation flights that would determine whether she graduated from the program. The uncertainty about her future assignments remained a constant background concern. While her male classmates could look forward to immediate deployment opportunities after graduation, Sarah faced the prospect of years in training positions, with no guarantee that she would ever fly combat missions. But rather than dwelling on uncertainties she couldn't control, she focused on mastering every skill that Apache pilots needed, preparing herself for opportunities that might come sooner than anyone expected. The weapons phase of Apache training began 6 months into the program, marking the transition from learning to fly the aircraft to learning how to employ its devastating arsenal against enemy targets. Sarah had been looking forward to this phase since the beginning of her training, knowing that weapons employment was where Apache pilots truly earned their reputation as masters of modern battlefield dominance. The Apache helicopter carried an impressive array of weapon systems, each requiring specific training and precise employment procedures. The 30mm automatic cannon mounted beneath the aircraft could fire 625 rounds per minute with devastating accuracy. Hellfire missiles provided precision strike capability against armored targets at ranges up to 8 kilometers. Hydra 70 rockets delivered area suppression fires against enemy positions. Each weapon system required different employment techniques, target identification procedures, and coordination protocols. Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez introduced the weapons phase with a sobering reminder about the responsibility that came with such destructive capability. "Gentleman and lady," he said, acknowledging Sarah with a slight nod. "You're about to learn how to employ weapons that can destroy enemy forces with surgical precision or devastating area effects. Every round you fire in training represents someone's life in combat. Treat these weapons with the respect they deserve." Sarah felt the weight of Rodriguez's words more acutely than she had expected. Throughout her training, she had focused on the technical challenge of mastering complex systems and procedures. But weapons employment forced her to confront the ultimate purpose of Apache helicopters: to find and destroy enemy forces in support of ground operations. It was sobering to realize that the aircraft she had dreamed of flying since childhood was designed specifically to kill people. The first weapon system they studied was the 30mm cannon, a chain gun capable of firing armor-piercing or high-explosive rounds with computer-controlled precision. The weapon was aimed using the pilot's helmet-mounted sight, which tracked head movements and displayed targeting information directly in the pilot's field of view. Learning to coordinate head movements, aircraft positioning, and weapon firing required a level of multitasking that challenged even the most experienced students. Lieutenant Morrison struggled with the helmet sight system during their first simulator session. "I can't seem to coordinate everything at once," he complained, after missing several targets during a training exercise. "My head keeps moving in one direction while I'm trying to fly in another." Sarah had spent considerable time studying helmet sight employment procedures, and she found the system more intuitive than many of her classmates. "Jake, try thinking of the helmet sight as an extension of your natural vision," she suggested. "Instead of consciously aiming the weapon, just look at what you want to hit, and let the system track your head movements." Rodriguez overheard Sarah's advice and nodded approvingly. "That's exactly right, Martinez. The helmet sight system works best when pilots trust their natural instincts and let the technology assist them, rather than trying to consciously control every aspect of the process." During her own helmet sight training, Sarah discovered that her years of studying Apache procedures had given her an intuitive understanding of how the various systems work together. While her classmates struggled to coordinate helmet movements with aircraft maneuvering, she found herself naturally integrating the different inputs into smooth, effective targeting sequences. "Outstanding work, Martinez," Rodriguez commented after Sarah successfully engaged a series of moving targets during a complex simulator exercise. "Your target acquisition times are faster than most pilots achieve after months of practice. How are you picking up the procedures so quickly?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "Chief, I think studying the procedures intellectually for so long helped me understand the logic behind the system design. When I actually use the equipment, it feels like I'm applying concepts I already understand rather than learning completely new skills." Rodriguez made notes in Sarah's training file as she spoke. Her explanation confirmed what he had observed throughout her training. She approached complex procedures with a level of conceptual understanding that accelerated her learning beyond typical timelines. "That's an excellent insight," he said. "Your theoretical preparation is translating into practical skills more effectively than I've seen from most students." The transition from cannon training to missile employment marked another significant step in weapons complexity. Hellfire missiles were precision weapons capable of destroying main battle tanks at extended ranges, but they required careful target identification, precise launch procedures, and coordination with other aircraft or ground units. The consequences of missile employment errors were far more serious than cannon mistakes, making accuracy and judgment even more critical. During Hellfire employment training, Sarah's analytical approach to complex procedures proved especially valuable. The missile system required pilots to coordinate multiple information sources, target identification, range calculations, threat assessments, and collateral damage estimates. While maintaining aircraft control and situational awareness, Sarah developed a systematic approach to missile employment that her classmates began adopting as their own procedures. Martinez has the right idea about breaking down complex procedures into manageable steps, Lieutenant Stevens observed during a group study session. I was trying to process all the information simultaneously, but her systematic approach makes it much easier to avoid mistakes. Sarah was pleased that her methods were helping her classmates, but she also recognized that teaching others was improving her own understanding of the procedures. The systematic approach helps me stay organized under pressure, she explained. When you're dealing with life and death decisions, you can't afford to skip steps or make assumptions. The weapons training culminated in live fire exercises at the Fort Rucker Gunnery Range, where students would actually fire cannons, rockets, and missiles at real targets for the first time. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared for her first live fire flight. All her theoretical knowledge and simulator training would finally be tested with actual weapons against real targets. Chief Rodriguez accompanied Sarah on her first live-fire mission, sitting in the co-pilot seat to observe her performance and provide guidance as needed. The targets included decommissioned vehicles, concrete bunkers, and specially designed targets that simulated various enemy threats. Each target required different weapons employment procedures and presented unique challenges for target identification and engagement. Remember, Martinez, Rodriguez said as they approached the gunnery range, live weapons behave differently from simulators. There's no reset button if something goes wrong, so take your time and follow procedures exactly as you've learned them. Sarah acknowledged Rodriguez's guidance while running through her pre-engagement checklist. She had practiced these procedures hundreds of times in simulators, but she could feel her heart rate increasing as she prepared to fire actual weapons from an Apache helicopter for the first time. Chief, I understand the safety procedures, and I'm ready to begin the exercise. The first target was an old armored personnel carrier, positioned 2,000 meters from their firing position. Sarah identified the target through her targeting system, confirmed the range and bearing, and selected armor-piercing ammunition for the 30mm cannon. She had performed this sequence countless times in training, but the knowledge that she was about to fire real bullets at a real target made every step feel more significant. Target identified, Sarah announced, following the standard engagement procedure. Armor piercing selected, range 2,000 meters, requesting permission to engage. Permission granted, Rodriguez replied. Engage when ready. Sarah squeezed the trigger and felt the Apache shake slightly as the 30mm cannon fired a burst of armor-piercing rounds. She watched through her targeting sight as the rounds impacted the target vehicle, sending up clouds of dust and debris. The visual and physical sensation of firing live ammunition was far more intense than any simulator had prepared her for. Good hits, Rodriguez observed, watching the target through his own optical system. Your ranging was accurate and your burst length was appropriate. How did that feel compared to simulator training? Much more intense, Chief, Sarah replied honestly. The physical sensation and the visual impact were completely different from what I expected, but the procedures worked exactly as we trained them. The live fire exercise continued with increasingly complex targets and engagement scenarios. Sarah fired Hydra rockets at area targets, requiring her to coordinate multiple rocket launches while maneuvering the aircraft to avoid simulated enemy fire. She employed Hellfire missiles against precision targets, demonstrating the skills needed to engage high-value enemy assets from extended ranges. By the end of the exercise, Sarah had successfully engaged every assigned target with accuracy that exceeded the minimum standards for Apache pilots. Rodriguez's evaluation notes reflected his assessment that her weapons employment skills were among the best he had seen from students at her experience level. Martinez, your performance today was exceptional, Rodriguez told her as they completed the post-flight debriefing. Your target acquisition was fast, your engagement procedures were flawless, and your accuracy was well above average. You've demonstrated that you can employ Apache weapons systems as effectively as any pilot I've trained. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction that went beyond simple pride in her performance. The live fire exercise had proven to herself and her instructors that she could handle the most demanding aspects of Apache operations. She had fired real weapons at real targets and achieved results that validated years of preparation and training. But even as she celebrated this milestone, Sarah remained aware of the restrictions that prevented her from using these skills in actual combat operations. She had proven that she could master Apache weapons employment, but she still faced uncertain prospects for applying those skills in the mission she most wanted to fly. The weapons phase continued with increasingly complex scenarios designed to simulate combat conditions. Sarah participated in multi-aircraft exercises where Apache helicopters coordinated with ground units and other aircraft to engage enemy forces. She learned close air support procedures that required precise coordination with friendly ground troops to avoid fratricidal incidents. She practiced battle damage assessment, target handoff procedures, and emergency engagement protocols. During one particularly challenging exercise, Sarah's Apache was assigned to provide close air support for a simulated infantry unit under attack from enemy positions. The scenario required her to identify friendly and enemy forces in close proximity, coordinate with ground controllers, and engage enemy targets while avoiding any risk to friendly troops. "This is Grim Reaper 06, came the radio call from the ground controller. "We have enemy positions in buildings 200 meters northeast of our location. Request immediate close air support to suppress enemy fire." Sarah studied the target area through her targeting system, identifying the buildings described by the ground controller while noting the locations of friendly forces marked by infrared strobes. The engagement required precision cannon fire at relatively close range to friendly troops, demanding careful target identification and controlled weapons employment. "Grim Reaper 06, this is Apache 21. Sarah responded. "I have visual on enemy positions in target buildings, confirming friendly forces marked by IR strobes 200 meters southwest of targets. Request final clearance to engage with 30 cannon." "Apache 21, you are cleared to engage. Friendlies are marked and in covered positions." Sarah carefully aimed her cannon at the enemy positions, double-checking her target identification and confirming that her firing solution would not endanger friendly forces. She fired controlled bursts at the enemy positions, achieving the suppressive effects requested by the ground controller while maintaining precise fire discipline. "Good effects on target," reported the ground controller. "Enemy fire has ceased and friendly forces are advancing. Thanks for the support, Apache 21. Rodriguez, who had been monitoring the exercise from the instructor station, was impressed with Sarah's performance during the close air support scenario. "Martinez, that was textbook close air support employment. Your target identification was precise, your coordination with ground forces was professional, and your weapons employment was exactly what the situation required." Sarah felt a deep sense of satisfaction from the successful completion of the exercise, but she also experienced a more complex emotion that surprised her. The realistic scenario had given her a glimpse of what Apache pilots actually did in combat, providing life-saving support to ground troops under fire. The exercise had been simulated, but the responsibilities and consequences were very real in actual combat operations. "Chief," Sarah said during the post-exercise debriefing, "that scenario helped me understand why Apache pilots are so important to ground operations. The precision required to support friendly troops without endangering them is incredible." "That's exactly right," Rodriguez replied. "Apache pilots hold life and death responsibility every time they engage targets near friendly forces. The margin for error is zero, and the consequences of mistakes can be catastrophic. That's why we train to such high standards." As the weapons phase neared its completion, Sarah's classmates had come to regard her as one of the most skilled pilots in their group. Her systematic approach to complex procedures, her superior knowledge of Apache systems, and her exceptional performance during live fire exercises had earned respect from students and instructors alike. Lieutenant Morrison, who had become Sarah's closest friend in the class, reflected on her impact during their group's final weapons training exercise. "You know, Martinez, when you first joined our class, I wasn't sure what to expect, but you've proven that skill and dedication matter more than anything else in Apache training." Sarah appreciated the recognition from her classmates, but she remained focused on the larger questions that her training success had raised. She had proven that she could master every aspect of Apache operations, including the weapons employment skills that defined combat aviation. But the restrictions that prevented her from flying combat missions remained in place, leaving her uncertain about how she would actually use the skills she had worked so hard to develop. The completion of weapons training marked the beginning of the final phase of Apache pilot education, tactical employment training, where students would learn to integrate their flying and weapons skills into comprehensive combat operations. It was the most demanding phase of the program, requiring mastery of complex tactical procedures while operating under simulated combat conditions. Sarah approached tactical training with the same systematic preparation that had served her throughout the Apache program. But she also recognized that this final phase would test not only her technical skills, but also her ability to make split-second decisions under pressure, the ultimate measure of combat pilot effectiveness. The tactical employment phase of Apache training represented the culmination of everything Sarah had learned during her 18 months at Fort Rucker. This final phase would test her ability to integrate flying skills, weapons employment, navigation, communications, and decision-making into the kind of complex combat operations that Apache pilots faced in actual warfare. It was also where the psychological demands of combat aviation became most apparent. Major Patricia Williams, the senior instructor responsible for tactical training, had flown 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. She understood both the technical demands of Apache operations and the mental toughness required to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. Her reputation among students was that of a demanding instructor who pushed pilots to their absolute limits while maintaining the highest safety standards. "Ladies and gentlemen," Major Williams said during the first tactical training briefing, again acknowledging Sarah's presence with a slight nod, "you've spent the last year learning how to fly Apache helicopters and employ their weapon systems. Now you're going to learn how to think like combat pilots. The scenarios you'll face in this phase are designed to replicate the complexity, stress, and uncertainty of actual combat operations." Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness as Major Williams outlined the tactical training program. The scenarios would include deep strike missions against enemy air defenses, close air support operations in urban environments, reconnaissance missions in hostile territory, and emergency procedures for aircraft malfunctions during combat. Each scenario would be evaluated not only on technical performance but also on decision-making, leadership, and adaptability under pressure. The first tactical scenario placed Sarah in command of a 2-ship Apache formation tasked with destroying enemy air defense positions that were threatening friendly ground operations. The mission required her to plan the route, coordinate with other aircraft, identify and engage multiple targets, and adapt to changing enemy threats while maintaining formation integrity and mission effectiveness. Lieutenant Morrison flew as her wingman for the mission, a role that reversed their usual dynamic since Sarah had been selected as flight leader based on her superior performance during weapons training. Morrison had initially expressed surprise at the assignment, but he had come to respect Sarah's tactical knowledge and decision-making abilities during their training together. "Martinez," Morrison said during their mission planning session, "I have to admit I was surprised when Major Williams assigned you as flight leader. But after watching your performance throughout training, I can't think of anyone I'd rather follow into a tactical scenario." Sarah appreciated Morrison's confidence, but she also felt the weight of responsibility that came with leading other pilots in combat operations. "Thanks, Jake. I've been studying tactical employment procedures since the beginning of training, and I think I understand what this mission requires. But I'm going to need your experience and judgment to make it work." The tactical scenario began before dawn, with Sarah and Morrison conducting a detailed mission briefing that covered route planning, target assignments, threat analysis, and contingency procedures. Sarah had spent the previous evening studying intelligence reports about enemy air defense capabilities, terrain features, and weather conditions that might affect their mission. "Our primary targets are 3 SA-8 surface-to-air missile sites protecting an enemy command center," Sarah explained during the briefing. "Intelligence indicates the sites are mobile and may have relocated since the last reconnaissance flight. We'll need to identify actual positions before engaging, and we'll have to coordinate our attacks to prevent the remaining sites from engaging us while we're focused on individual targets." Morrison reviewed the intelligence materials and tactical charts spread across their planning table. "The terrain looks challenging," he observed. "We'll have to use the ridge lines for concealment, but that limits our maneuvering options if we take enemy fire. How do you want to handle target identification and engagement sequencing?" Sarah had been thinking about these tactical problems throughout her preparation for the scenario. "I want to use a reconnaissance by fire approach," she said. "We'll identify all 3 sites before engaging any of them, then coordinate simultaneous attacks to minimize their ability to respond. If we take fire during the reconnaissance phase, we'll immediately transition to defensive maneuvering and call for support." The actual mission began with a low-level flight through mountainous terrain designed to avoid enemy radar detection. Sarah led the 2 aircraft formation through valleys and behind ridgelines, navigating by terrain features, while monitoring her instruments for indications of enemy threats. The flight required constant attention to formation positioning, navigation accuracy, and threat detection while maintaining the aggressive flying necessary for tactical operations. "Apache 2.1, this is Apache 22. Morrison transmitted over their tactical radio frequency. "I have radar warning indications at 2 o'clock. Possible enemy air defense activity." Sarah immediately began scanning for visual indications of enemy air defense sites while maneuvering her aircraft to avoid potential missile engagement zones. She spotted the distinctive radar antenna of an SA-8 missile system positioned on a hillside approximately 3 kilometers from their planned route. "Apache 2.2, I have visual on SAM site number 1, Sarah transmitted. Continue surveillance while I identify the other 2 sites. Maintain formation and be ready for immediate defensive maneuvering. The next 10 minutes required Sarah to balance multiple competing demands, finding and identifying enemy targets, maintaining formation integrity, avoiding detection by enemy sensors, and preparing for weapons employment against defended positions. She located all 3 missile sites and developed a tactical plan for coordinated attacks that would minimize their exposure to enemy fire. Apache 22, I have all targets identified, Sarah transmitted. We'll engage sites 1 and 3 simultaneously with Hellfire missiles, then reposition for cannon attacks on Site 2. Follow my lead and maintain spacing for mutual support. The weapons employment phase of the mission tested every skill Sarah had developed during her Apache training. She had to coordinate missile launches with Morrison while maneuvering her aircraft to avoid enemy fire and maintaining situational awareness of threats throughout the target area. The stress was intense, but her systematic approach to complex procedures served her well under pressure. Missile away, Sarah announced as she launched a Hellfire missile at the first target. Time of flight 30 seconds. Morrison, you're cleared to engage target 3. Copy, engaging target 3. Morrison replied. Missile away. Time of flight 28 seconds. Both missiles found their targets, destroying 2 of the 3 enemy air defense sites with precision strikes that eliminated the threat to friendly ground operations. Sarah immediately maneuvered her formation toward the remaining site for a cannon attack that would complete their mission objectives. The final engagement required Sarah to coordinate a complex attack sequence that involved both aircraft firing simultaneously while avoiding the remaining enemy missile system. She had to time her approach carefully to maximize weapons effectiveness while minimizing exposure to enemy fire. Apache 22, follow my lead for final attack, Sarah transmitted. We'll approach from the northwest, engage with cannon fire, then egress to the south. Watch for enemy response and be ready for defensive maneuvering. The cannon attack went exactly as planned, with both aircraft delivering precise fire that destroyed the final enemy air defense site. Sarah led the formation away from the target area using terrain masking to avoid potential threats, completing the mission with all objectives accomplished and no damage to their aircraft. Major Williams, who had been monitoring the entire mission from the control room, was impressed with Sarah's performance as flight leader. Martinez, that was outstanding tactical employment, she said during the post-mission debriefing. Your mission planning was thorough, your target identification was accurate, and your coordination with your wingman was professional. Most importantly, your decision-making under pressure was exactly what we expect from Apache flight leaders. Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction from Major Williams' evaluation, but she was more interested in Morrison's assessment of her leadership during the mission. As her wingman, he had been in the best position to judge whether her tactical decisions had been sound and whether her coordination had been effective. Martinez, Morrison said after their debriefing, that was some of the best tactical flying I've seen during our training. Your planning was comprehensive, your execution was precise, and your leadership kept us organized under pressure. I'd fly with you on any mission. The tactical scenarios continued with increasingly complex challenges designed to test different aspects of combat operations. Sarah participated in urban close air support missions that required precise target identification in populated areas, deep strike missions against heavily defended targets, and reconnaissance operations in contested airspace. Each scenario presented unique challenges and required different tactical approaches. During one particularly demanding scenario, Sarah's Apache suffered a simulated engine failure while conducting a reconnaissance mission deep in enemy territory. The scenario required her to maintain aircraft control while making critical decisions about whether to attempt an emergency landing in hostile territory or risk flying the damaged aircraft back to friendly lines. Apache 21, you have a simulated engine failure, announced the instructor pilot monitoring the exercise. You're losing power and altitude. What are your intentions? Sarah immediately began executing emergency procedures while analyzing her options. The simulated engine failure had occurred at a particularly bad location, too far from friendly territory for a safe emergency landing, but deep enough in enemy territory that capture would be likely if she went down. I'm executing single-engine flight procedures, Sarah announced over the radio. Checking engine parameters and calculating range to friendly territory. Request immediate support for emergency egress. The decision to attempt flying a damaged Apache back to friendly territory was risky, but Sarah's analysis indicated it was the best option available. She reduced aircraft weight by jettisoning external fuel tanks, optimized her flight profile for maximum range with reduced power, and coordinated with other aircraft for escort protection during her emergency egress. Apache 22, this is Apache 21, she transmitted to Morrison, who was flying escort for her emergency return. I'm maintaining single-engine flight at reduced altitude. Estimated flight time to friendly territory is 25 minutes. Request you maintain high cover and watch for enemy interceptors. The emergency flight back to friendly territory tested Sarah's aircraft control skills under degraded conditions while requiring her to maintain situational awareness and coordinate with supporting aircraft. She had to balance the need for speed with the limitations imposed by her simulated engine failure, making constant adjustments to her flight profile as conditions changed. Major Williams observed Sarah's handling of the emergency scenario with particular interest. Emergency procedures under combat conditions represented the ultimate test of pilot judgment and technical skill. Sarah's systematic approach to problem-solving and her calm demeanor under pressure were exactly the qualities that distinguished effective combat pilots from those who struggled under stress. Martinez, your handling of that emergency was exemplary, Major Williams said during the post-exercise debriefing. Your decision-making process was logical, your emergency procedures were flawless, and your coordination with supporting aircraft was professional. In actual combat, that kind of performance could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. As the tactical phase neared completion, Sarah's performance had consistently ranked among the top students in her class. Her combination of technical knowledge, flying skills, and tactical judgment had earned recognition from instructors and respect from classmates. But the approaching end of Apache training also forced her to confront the uncertainty about her future assignments that had been a constant background concern throughout the program. The military's restrictions on women in combat roles remained in place, meaning that Sarah would graduate from Apache training with qualifications she might not be authorized to use in actual combat operations. While her male classmates could look forward to immediate assignments to combat units and potential deployments to active conflict zones, Sarah faced the prospect of training assignments with uncertain career prospects. During one of their final training flights together, Morrison raised the subject that had been on everyone's mind but that nobody had directly addressed with Sarah. "What do you think you'll do after graduation?" he asked during a break between training exercises. "I mean, with the current restrictions on combat roles?" Sarah had been thinking about this question throughout her training, but she still didn't have a definitive answer. "I'm hoping to get assigned to a training unit where I can continue flying Apaches and maybe help train other pilots," she said. "Beyond that, I'm waiting to see how regulations might change over time." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "It seems like a waste of talent to have you complete all this training and then not be able to use it in actual missions. You're one of the best pilots in our class." "Thanks, Jake," Sarah replied. "But I knew the situation when I started training. I decided it was worth the risk to be prepared for opportunities that might come later, even if the timing is uncertain." The final evaluation flights at the end of tactical training would determine whether students graduated from the Apache program and received their qualification as combat-ready pilots. These check rides tested every skill developed during 18 months of intensive training, requiring flawless performance under the kind of pressure that simulated actual combat conditions. Sarah's final evaluation flight was scheduled with Major Williams, who would assess her performance across all aspects of Apache operations. The check ride would include complex tactical scenarios, emergency procedures, weapons employment, and decision-making under pressure. Passing the evaluation would qualify her as an Apache pilot, regardless of the restrictions that might limit her initial assignments. "Martinez," Major Williams said during the pre-flight briefing for Sarah's final evaluation, "this check ride will test everything you've learned during Apache training. I'll be evaluating your technical skills, your tactical judgment, and your ability to handle unexpected situations under pressure. Are you ready?" Sarah felt confident about her preparation, but she also recognized that the final evaluation represented the culmination of years of work toward her goal of becoming an Apache pilot. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. "I'm ready." The flight that would determine whether Sarah achieved her dream of becoming a qualified Apache pilot was about to begin. Sarah's final evaluation flight began in the pre-dawn darkness of a humid Alabama morning. The Apache helicopter sat on the flight line like a mechanical predator, its sleek profile silhouetted against the orange glow of approaching sunrise. Major Williams conducted the pre-flight inspection with meticulous attention to detail, knowing that this check ride would determine whether Sarah became the first woman to complete Apache pilot training without the guarantee of flying combat missions. "The weather looks good for our evaluation," Major Williams said as they completed the exterior inspection. "We'll have clear visibility and light winds, so there won't be any weather-related distractions from your performance. Are you ready to begin?" Sarah felt a familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that had accompanied every major milestone in her training. But underneath those emotions was a quiet confidence built from 18 months of intensive preparation and consistent superior performance. "Yes, ma'am, I'm ready." The first phase of the evaluation tested Sarah's basic flying skills under progressively challenging conditions. Major Williams directed her through a series of precision maneuvers that required exact altitude control, precise navigation, and smooth coordination of all flight controls. These fundamental skills formed the foundation for everything else Apache pilots did, and any weaknesses in basic flying ability would disqualify a candidate regardless of their performance in other areas. Sarah's flying was smooth and confident as she worked through the required maneuvers. Her control inputs were precise without being jerky, her altitude control was exact, and her navigation was accurate to within the tight tolerances required for Apache operations. Major Williams noted that Sarah's flying technique showed the kind of natural feel for aircraft control that distinguished exceptional pilots from merely competent ones. "Your basic flying skills are excellent," Major Williams commented as they transitioned to the next phase of the evaluation. "Now we'll test your system's knowledge and emergency procedures. I want you to demonstrate your response to a hydraulic system failure during low-level flight." The simulated emergency required Sarah to diagnose the problem, execute appropriate emergency procedures, and maintain aircraft control while coordinating her response with air traffic control. She had practiced these procedures hundreds of times during training, but performing them smoothly under evaluation pressure required the kind of systematic approach she had developed throughout her Apache training. Sarah immediately recognized the simulated hydraulic failure indicators and began executing the appropriate emergency checklist. Her response was methodical and precise, addressing each required action in proper sequence while maintaining aircraft control and situational awareness. Major Williams observed that Sarah's emergency procedures were flawless and that her stress level remained manageable even under simulated emergency conditions. "Outstanding emergency response," Major Williams said as Sarah completed the required procedures. "Your diagnosis was immediate, your execution was flawless, and your aircraft control remained precise throughout the emergency. Now let's test your weapons employment skills." The weapons phase of the evaluation required Sarah to engage multiple targets, using different weapon systems while maneuvering the aircraft through challenging terrain. Major Williams presented her with a tactical scenario that required rapid target identification, appropriate weapon selection, and precise employment procedures under time pressure. Sarah systematically engaged each target according to proper employment procedures, demonstrating the weapon skills that had earned recognition throughout her training. Her target acquisition was fast, her weapon selection was appropriate for each threat type, and her employment procedures followed established tactics exactly. Major Williams noted that Sarah's weapons employment was among the best she had seen from any student. "Your weapons employment is exceptional," Major Williams observed. "You're demonstrating the kind of systematic approach to complex procedures that we expect from the most capable Apache pilots. Now let's test your tactical decision-making with a complex scenario." The final phase of Sarah's evaluation presented her with a multi-layered tactical problem that required integration of all her Apache pilot skills. The scenario involved a close air support mission in an urban environment with multiple friendly units, civilian populations, and enemy threats distributed throughout a complex target area. "Apache 21, this is Ground Commander," came the radio call that initiated the tactical scenario. "We have friendly units in contact with enemy forces in a populated area. Request immediate close air support, but be advised there are civilians in the target area who must be protected." Sarah immediately began analyzing the tactical situation, identifying friendly unit positions, locating enemy threats, and determining how to provide effective support while avoiding civilian casualties. The scenario required her to coordinate with ground forces, make rapid target identification decisions, and employ appropriate weapons while maintaining precise situational awareness. "Ground Commander, Apache 21 has visual on your position," Sarah responded. "I need you to mark friendly positions with IR strobes and provide detailed descriptions of enemy locations relative to civilian areas. I will not engage until I have positive target identification and confirmation of civilian safety." The exchange demonstrated exactly the kind of careful coordination that Major Williams wanted to see during close air support operations. Sarah's insistence on positive target identification and civilian safety considerations showed the judgment and responsibility required for combat operations in populated areas. The tactical scenario continued for 45 minutes, with Sarah successfully engaging enemy targets while protecting friendly forces and civilian populations. Co-performance required constant coordination with ground units, precise target identification, and careful weapons employment that achieved mission objectives while adhering to strict safety protocols. Major Williams had been evaluating Apache pilots for 8 years, and she recognized exceptional performance when she saw it. Sarah's handling of the complex tactical scenario demonstrated not only technical proficiency, but also the kind of tactical judgment and decision-making ability that distinguished combat-ready pilots from those who needed additional training. Apache 21, terminate the tactical scenario, Major Williams announced. Return to base for post-flight debriefing and evaluation results. The flight back to Fort Rucker gave Sarah time to reflect on her performance during the final evaluation. She felt confident about her flying skills, emergency procedures, and weapons employment, but she wasn't certain how Major Williams had assessed her tactical decision-making during the complex close air support scenario. The evaluation had tested every skill she had developed during Apache training, and her graduation depended on achieving satisfactory performance in all areas. After completing the post-flight inspection and securing the aircraft, Sarah and Major Williams proceeded to the debriefing room where her final evaluation results would be delivered. The debriefing process was formal and thorough, covering every aspect of her performance during the check ride. Major Williams reviewed her scores in each evaluation area, explaining the standards she had been measured against and how her performance compared to those requirements. Martinez, Major Williams began, your performance during today's evaluation was outstanding in every area. Your basic flying skills exceeded all standards, your emergency procedures were flawless, your weapons employment was precise and effective, and your tactical decision-making demonstrated exactly the kind of judgment we expect from Apache pilots. Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her as Major Williams continued with the detailed evaluation results. She had not only passed the final check ride, but had achieved superior ratings in every category. After 18 months of intensive training, she had finally achieved her goal of becoming a qualified Apache helicopter pilot. Congratulations, Major Williams said, extending her hand to Sarah. You are now a qualified AH-6-4 Apache pilot. Your performance throughout training has been exceptional, and you've proven that skill and dedication are the only qualifications that matter for combat aviation. Sarah shook Major Williams' hand with a mixture of pride and gratitude that surprised her with its intensity. The moment represented the culmination of years of preparation and months of demanding training. She had achieved something that many had doubted was possible, becoming the first woman to complete Apache pilot training despite restrictions that prevented her from immediately flying combat missions. Thank you, ma'am, Sarah said. This training has been the most challenging and rewarding experience of my life. I'm grateful for the opportunity and for the excellent instruction I've received. Major Williams smiled at Sarah's response. You've earned this qualification through your own hard work and determination. Your instructors and classmates have nothing but respect for your performance throughout the program. The graduation ceremony for Sarah's Apache class was held the following week, with family members, instructors, and military officials in attendance. Sarah's parents had driven from San Antonio to witness their daughter's graduation from the most demanding pilot training program in military aviation. Her father, the mechanic who had supported her dreams since childhood, watched with pride as Sarah received her Apache pilot wings. Lieutenant Morrison and the other members of Sarah's class had requested permission to attend her graduation ceremony, recognizing that her achievement represented a historic milestone in military aviation. During his remarks at the ceremony, Morrison reflected on Sarah's impact on their training class and her potential influence on future military aviation opportunities. Captain Martinez has demonstrated that skill, dedication, and professionalism are the only qualifications that matter for combat aviation, Morrison said during his address. Her performance throughout training has been exceptional, and she's proven that diversity strengthens our military capabilities rather than weakening them. Chief Warrant Officer Rodriguez, who had been Sarah's primary instructor throughout Apache training, also spoke at the graduation ceremony about her unique qualifications and the example she had set for future students. Captain Martinez approached Apache training with a level of preparation and dedication that I've rarely seen in my 15 years as an instructor, Rodriguez said. Her systematic approach to complex procedures and her exceptional flying skills have established new standards for excellence in our training program. But even as Sarah celebrated her graduation from Apache training, she faced uncertainty about her future assignments. The military restrictions on women in combat roles meant that she would be assigned to training positions rather than combat units, potentially limiting her opportunities to use the skills she had worked so hard to develop. 3 weeks after graduation, Sarah received orders assigning her to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where she would serve as an Apache instructor pilot in the 82nd Airborne Division's Aviation Brigade. The assignment would allow her to continue flying Apache helicopters while training other pilots, but it would not involve the combat missions she had prepared for throughout her military career. Sarah reported to Fort Bragg with mixed emotions about her new assignment. She was grateful for the opportunity to continue flying Apache helicopters and contribute to pilot training, but she remained frustrated by the restrictions that prevented her from flying the combat missions she felt most qualified to perform. Her new commander, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Hayes, had specifically requested Sarah's assignment based on her exceptional performance during Apache training. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Hayes said during their initial meeting, "I requested your assignment because of your outstanding training record, and because I believe you can make significant contributions to our pilot training program. I know the current restrictions limit your mission opportunities, but I want you to know that you'll have every chance to demonstrate your capabilities in this assignment." Sarah appreciated Colonel Hayes' confidence in her abilities, but she also wanted to be direct about her career aspirations.
"Sir, I'm grateful for this opportunity, and I'm committed to being the best instructor pilot I can be.
But I also hope that regulations will eventually change to allow qualified women to fly combat missions. When that happens, I want to be ready." Colonel Hayes nodded approvingly at Sarah's directness. "I understand your aspirations, Captain, and I think regulatory changes are more likely than most people realize. Military effectiveness ultimately depends on using our best qualified people, regardless of other considerations. Your job is to stay ready for those opportunities while contributing to our mission here."
Sarah's work as an Apache instructor pilot proved to be both challenging and rewarding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Training other pilots required her to master teaching techniques that complemented her flying skills, and working with students from diverse backgrounds broadened her perspective on military aviation careers. She quickly developed a reputation as a demanding but effective instructor who pushed students to achieve their highest potential. During her second year at Fort Bragg, Sarah received news that would change the trajectory of her military career and the opportunities available to all women in combat aviation. The Department of Defense announced that it was reviewing restrictions on women in combat roles, with the possibility of lifting prohibitions that had limited female service members' participation in direct combat operations. Colonel Hayes called Sarah into his office on the day the policy review was announced.
"Captain, I wanted you to hear this directly from me," he said. "The DoD is conducting a comprehensive review of combat restrictions, including the policies that have limited your mission opportunities. I don't know what the outcome will be, but I want you to be prepared for the possibility that those restrictions might be lifted." Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness at the news. The possibility of flying combat missions represented everything she had been working toward since joining the military, but she also recognized that policy changes would bring new challenges and opportunities that she couldn't fully anticipate. "Sir, what do you think the timeline might be for any policy changes?" Sarah asked. "These reviews typically take months or even years," Colonel Hayes replied. "But given the changing nature of warfare and the military's need for qualified personnel, I suspect changes could come sooner than many people expect. My advice is to stay focused on your current responsibilities while being ready for new opportunities." 6 months later, the Department of Defense announced that restrictions on women in combat roles would be gradually lifted, beginning with selected military occupational specialties that included Apache helicopter pilots. The announcement specified that qualified women could apply for combat assignments after completing additional evaluation procedures designed to ensure readiness for combat operations. Sarah was among the first women to apply for combat assignments under the new policies. Her Apache training record, her performance as an instructor pilot, and her demonstrated commitment to combat aviation made her an ideal candidate for the pilot program that would integrate women into previously restricted roles. The evaluation process for combat assignment was comprehensive and demanding, requiring Sarah to demonstrate not only her flying skills but also her physical conditioning, mental toughness, and ability to work effectively with combat units. The process took 3 months and included interviews with senior commanders, psychological evaluations, and intensive flight testing under simulated combat conditions. When Sarah received notification that her application for combat assignment had been approved, she felt a sense of completion that had been building throughout her military career. The 8-year-old girl who had watched Apache helicopters at an airshow in San Antonio was finally going to fly combat missions in the aircraft that had inspired her dreams of military service. Her assignment came through 6 weeks later. She would deploy to Afghanistan as part of an Apache squadron supporting ground operations against Taliban forces. It was exactly the kind of combat assignment she had been preparing for since beginning Apache training, and it represented the culmination of years of work toward a goal that many had considered impossible. On the day before her deployment to Afghanistan, Sarah visited the local elementary school where she had been invited to speak to students about military aviation careers. During her presentation, she talked about the importance of setting ambitious goals and working systematically to achieve them regardless of obstacles. A young girl in the audience raised her hand and asked, "Can girls really fly military helicopters in combat?"
Sarah smiled at the question that reminded her of her own childhood curiosity about military aviation.
"Yes," she replied. "Anyone who is willing to work hard enough and meet the standards can fly military helicopters." The most important thing is to never let anyone convince you that something is impossible just because it's difficult. As Sarah prepared for her deployment to Afghanistan, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a childhood dream inspired by an air show to becoming one of the first women authorized to fly Apache combat missions. The path had been longer and more uncertain than she had anticipated, but her systematic preparation and unwavering determination had ultimately made the difference between achieving her goal and accepting limitations that others had tried to impose. Her deployment orders specified that she would fly close air support missions, reconnaissance operations, and direct action raids against high-value targets, exactly the kind of combat operations that Apache helicopters were designed to perform. After years of